What is a creature without fear, if not a storm-given flesh? What is a hunger for speed, if not a curse older than empires, something primal that no god, no creed, no empire of man has ever truly tamed? In the forgotten dark where stars die nameless deaths, there echoes one truth. Some beings race not to win, but to kill whatever can still scream. They call them Speed Freaks. Across a wasteland world stripped bare by centuries of war, an abandoned Imperial outpost lies half-buried in ash storms that howl like wounded spirits. The wind drags iron chains across broken hab blocks, ringing with the quiet, metallic mourning of a dead civilization. Beneath it all, engine tracks scored into the dust remain fresh too fresh. The smell of promethium lingers in the air like a warning. Here, the Orks did not march. They did not besiege. They raced, circling the settlement again and again until every wall shook and every soul inside was driven to madness, terror, or silence. For Speed Freaks, the hunt does not begin with footsteps. It begins with engines growling in the void like hungry beasts waking from a long sleep. Elsewhere, far from the ruins, a convoy of Astra Militarum transports crawls through a valley carved from centuries of bombardment. The soldiers inside sit in uneasy quiet, gripping their lasguns as if they can hear something in the distance, something faint, like a heartbeat mixed with metal. Veterans know that sound, though none dare speak it aloud. Not thunder, not wind, but engines running far beyond safe limits, choking, roaring, and screaming as if the machines themselves beg for release. The youngest troopers try to steady their breath, understanding too late that Speed Freaks are never seen before they are heard. An officer mutters a prayer to the Emperor, voice trembling despite the words, while the Vox crackles with static that almost masks the rising growl coming from behind the hills. Only when the ground begins to shudder do they realize what hunts them. Only then is it already too late. Across the plains of Armageddon, scorched black after centuries of bloodshed, a single war boss stands upon a cliff of rusted metal and crushed tank husks. His armor is a patchwork of stolen plates fused with scraps of exhaust pipes still smoking from the latest raid. Behind him stretches a gathering of machines so chaotic they form their own warped beauty. Trucks stitched together from broken chimera hulls, battle wagons bristling with cannons that barely aim true, and bikes, hundreds of them, screaming like metallic predators eager to be unleashed. Each Speed Freak awaits only one thing, the command to chase. They live for it. They burn for it. Their minds wired sometimes literally to the roar of acceleration. To them, the galaxy is not a battlefield. It is a racetrack paved with bones, and the finish line is always someone else's corpse. On another world consumed entirely by desert storms, an Adeptus Mechanicus research team attempts to catalog the remains of a crashed Ork warbike. Its frame is unusually reinforced, its engine overcharged beyond logic or physics, every cable fused with crude copper graphs that pulse faintly even in death. One tech priest approaches with mechanical precision, analyzing scorch patterns, measuring torque, interpreting the machine's final moments. But as he touches the chassis, he recoils. The metal is still warm days after the crash. He murmurs a single line recorded in Mechanicus binary, a message that should not send fear into a being half machine. This engine dreams. The Freaks speak of their machines as though they are alive, and sometimes, disturbingly, they are. The Mechanicus believes the Orks do not understand what they build. But what if the truth is far worse? What if the Orks understand too well? Where hive cities once pierced the sky like cathedral spears, their ruins now echo with roving gangs of Speed Freaks who turn abandoned streets into death trails. The skulls of fallen nobles are tied to their handlebars. Rusted weapon mounts scrape the ferrocrete walls as they drift through the tightest corridors with impossible precision. Their laughter deep, guttural, unrestrained, filling the hollow carcass of the city. Imperial survivors hide in the shadows, clinging to hope as the sound of engines rolls through the lower levels like a monstrous tide. For the Speed Freaks, this is sacred ground. Urban ruins are their hunting temples, places where speed becomes ritual and slaughter becomes art. The few guardsmen who remain whisper to each other that the Orks are not simply raiders, they are worshippers of momentum, praying with exhaust fumes and bolt shells. On the frontier world of Karkellen, a squad of space marines from the Raven Guard observe from the high ridge of a shattered canyon. They watch a mob of Speed Freaks circle a captured Imperial artillery battery, firing wildly as they spin in maddening, unpredictable patterns. The Marines note their movements with precision, yet even enhanced Astartes' minds struggle to predict the chaos. Speed Freaks do not fight in straight lines or discernible formations. They fight in spirals, loops, crescent patterns that mimic storms rather than armies. The Raven Guard captain watches the spectacle and senses something more than random violence. Something orchestrated by instinct, by an alien pulse that spreads from orc to orc. He speaks quietly to his men. This is not madness, it is method. Their own twisted form of it. And as the Freaks unleash another wave of deafening acceleration, the captain feels a strange, unsettling truth. These Orks are evolving. Far beyond Imperial borders, on a world with no official name, only a crude Orc glyph carved into moons orbiting above it, an entire settlement vibrates constantly from the sound of engines. Dust never settles here. Scrap towers shake from perpetual motion. The very ground trembles with a rhythm that feels like a heartbeat too powerful for flesh. This is a Speed Freak stronghold, a sprawling junkyard metropolis where every creature lives for the next race, the next challenge, the next prey. Grot mechanics scurry like nervous insects, bolting scrap plates onto warbikes that will likely explode before finishing a race. Knobs rev their engines so violently that flames burst from the pipes like dragon breath. Racing tracks twist through the city, elevated on ramshackle platforms, barely held together by rust and belief. And above it all, a warboss bellows a promise that echoes through the system, faster, louder, deadlier. Deep in the bowels of a derelict starship drifting through the void, a lone Ultramarines chaplain moves carefully through the silent corridors. He investigates the distress signal that brought him here, a signal that ended abruptly in a burst of static. The walls are scarred with burn marks, and several decks show signs of high-speed impacts, as though something rammed through them with reckless abandon. He kneels beside a torn servo skull, its memory core still flickering with fragmented recordings. He activates it, and the Vox relic whispers a haunting sound. Engines, impossibly loud, tearing through metal corridors where no vehicle should fit. The chaplain tightens his grip on his Crozius, whispering a litany of protection. But as he approaches the ship's central cargo bay, he sees drag marks, tire patterns, and blood sprayed in erratic arcs across the walls. The Speed Freaks were here, and they were not done. In a secluded shrine on a moon long forgotten by most Imperial cartographers, a lone scribe illuminates parchment beneath dim candlelight. He records rare accounts from refugees who barely survived Speed Freak raids. Their stories speak not just of Orks, but of visions, blinding flashes of light, ethereal echoes of laughter, peculiar symbols carved into the ground after the Freaks departed. Some claim to have seen spectral shapes racing behind the Orks, like shadows given speed, like spirits pulled into the storm. The scribe hesitates as he writes, for such descriptions align too closely with Forbidden's text describing warp phenomena. Could it be that the Freaks' obsession with speed reaches beyond the material realm? Could their frenzy be a bridge unintended, yet reel into something far darker than even Orkkind understands? His quill trembles as he inscribes one final note, a warning no one will read in time. The faster they go, the thinner the veil becomes. And on a distant world where the sky burns with auroras twisted by weapons testing long forgotten, a lone guardsman drags himself across a field of shattered metal. His regiment has been wiped out. The ruins of their tanks lie strewn like broken toys across the horizon. He hears engines still, though he knows they are far away now, echoing through his skull like a memory that refuses to fade. As he crawls toward the remnants of a downed Vox tower, he spots something half buried in the dirt. a glyph painted in orc red, still wet, still fresh. It pulses faintly, as though reacting to his presence. He reaches out, hesitating, then touches it. The ground trembles. The engines return. Not in the distance, but beneath him. Something buried, something massive, metallic, and awakening, shudders to life. And as the earth begins to crack open, the guardsman realizes that the freaks had not left. They were waiting for the next race to begin. The earth splits as the buried engine howls awake, vomiting dust and fire into the bruised sky. Beneath the guardsman's trembling hands, the soil collapses into a cavern of metal ribs and rusted teeth. The beast beneath the planet's crust shakes free its slumber, a titanic orc kill rig entombed for decades, perhaps centuries, now reborn with a fury that feels ritualistic. The guardsman stares into the rising inferno, realizing that this world was never a battleground claimed by the Imperium. It was a racetrack the Speed Freaks had prepared long before mankind settled here. As the kill rig's colossal wheels break the surface, the air thickens with the rapture of pure acceleration. The guardsman's whispered prayers scatter in the wind like ash. He knows no reinforcements will come, no warning will be believed. And as the machine roars its first breath in generations, he feels, rather than hears, the others awakening beneath the ground one engine, then another, then dozens. In orbit, aboard the command deck of the battlecruiser Sanctity of Resolve, Lord Commissar Albrecht watches the planet below through a reinforced viewport scarred by previous wars. His jaw tightens as he observes tremors rippling across continents. Vox feeds overflow with static panic and impossible reports of subterranean engines rising like iron leviathans. Behind him, the ship's confessor mutters prayers into a censer, spilling thick incense that coils like funeral smoke around the bridge crew. These signs were foretold, the priest intones, voice quivering. When the green tide burrows into the bones of a world, it is corruption made manifest. But Albrecht can sense something else, a pattern hidden in the chaos. The freaks do not rise randomly. They surface along fault lines that intersect with old Imperial survey markers. Lines that might form a message, or a map, or something far more dangerous. And though he refuses to admit it aloud, the Commissar feels a cold, sacrilegious thought. The Orks weren't hiding beneath the world. They were waiting for someone to arrive. On the planet's northern pole, a convent of the Adeptus Sororitas stands like an obsidian cathedral carved from ice. Inside its hallowed halls, the sisters kneel in prayer as tremors ripple through the frozen ground. Candles flicker violently, spitting sparks that dance like dying stars. Canoness Selene rises, power armor gleaming silver blue beneath stained glass depictions of martyrs burned by the light of their faith. Her senses sharpened by decades of devotion and bloodshed, feel the ground humming with unnatural rhythm. She orders her sisters to arm, not with the urgency of fear, but with the calm precision of conviction. As hymns rise in resonant voices, the echoing blasts of distant explosions answer them like a dark chorus. Selene pauses before a mural depicting the Emperor as a radiant guardian, yet something in the stone eyes seems dimmer today. "Holy Emperor," she whispers, "show us if this is your judgment or a trial born of alien malice." For the first time in years, no answer comes. Far below, in the labyrinthine mining tunnels stretching beneath the equator, a faction of laborers and servitors huddles around a single cracked lumen globe. The tunnels tremble with the unmistakable rhythm of racing engines, growing louder, closer, intimate. Overseer Drawn, an old man whose loyalty to the Imperium outlived his health and youth, grips a data slate with hands too weak to stop their shaking. One of the miners, a quiet woman with eyes scarred from radiation burns, whispers a blasphemy that freezes the air. What if these things were never Orc-built? What if we dug into something the Imperium wanted buried? Drawn almost strikes her for heresy, but stops. Because in his heart, he remembers the early days of the colony, the seismic readings no one explained, the tunnels they were forbidden to map, the administratum order that erased 2 whole districts from planetary records. When the first massive shadow bursts through a tunnel wall, engines screaming like a damned spirit, he understands the truth. Something was hidden here long before the Orks came. In the command sanctum of the planetary governor's fortress, Governor Helix paces amid walls lined with banners proclaiming loyalty, honor, and imperial truth. But truth fractures easily in the face of planetary doom. His advisors argue some insisting evacuation is the Emperor's will, others demanding a counterattack. The astropath kneels in agony as warp echoes crackle through her skull, her visions fractured by flashes of impossible motion shapes racing through psychic space with the speed of cursed meteors. She screams that the Orks are not alone, that something rides behind them, like shadows shaped by velocity itself. Helix, sweating beneath ceremonial robes far too heavy for a coward's shoulders, mutters that the Emperor protects. But he sees the fear in the eyes of his officers. He feels the tremors rattling the marble floor. He senses the betrayal he refuses to name. The Imperium knew this world was unstable, knew it harbored dormant threats, and still they sent colonists. Still they sent him. At the edge of the Varney's wastes, a squad of Imperial guardsmen takes shelter in the remains of a shattered cathedral half swallowed by sand. Through broken arches once filled with holy icons, they watch dust clouds rise toward the horizon, dense, fast-moving, unnatural. Sergeant Mara, a veteran with scars etched like scripture across her face, speaks softly to the young trooper beside her. "Not every war has a clear enemy," she says. "Sometimes the ground itself wants you dead." She closes her eyes, remembering the moment she first saw Speed Freaks tear through a battlefield, their vehicles moving with such savagery that reality seemed to warp in their wake. Engines were never meant to roar like that. Speed was never meant to be worshipped. As the dust storm approaches, Mara grips a rosary hanging from her flak vest, a relic from her late brother. She presses it to her forehead, whispering a prayer half remembered, half invented. "If the Emperor can hear us, let him slow the storm." Across the wasteland, the storm does not slow. It becomes a wall of sound and metal, shimmering with heat and madness. A mob of Speed Freaks bursts through the dust, their machines tearing across the plains like iron comets. Their laughter feral, giddy, relentless melds with the roar of engines, pushed to suicidal limits. In the heart of this metallic hurricane rides a warboss unlike any Mara has seen, adorned with trophies carved from tank hulls, powered by an engine wired into his own ribcage. Every breath he takes pumps fuel into both lungs and machine. His eyes burn with a singular obsession, speed as destiny, as creed, as truth. But something else glows behind his gaze, a flicker of cunning rarely found in Orks, a purpose, a destination. The Freaks do not veer toward the guardsmen hiding in the cathedral ruins. They race past them, toward the mountains. Toward the seismic fault lines the Commissar identified. Toward something waiting beneath. In the mountains, a hidden Mechanicus shrine hums with cold, calculating fear. Magos Helion pores over encrypted archives, comparing newly acquired battlefield readings with ancient classified schematics. What she finds should not exist. Beneath the planet lies an engine vast, dormant, woven through the bedrock like a cybernetic heart. Not Orc-made, not human-made. Something older. Something impossibly advanced yet barbarically tethered. The Orcs' awakening engines were merely triggers. The seismic lines match perfectly with an alien construct recorded only once in pre-imperial history. The remnants of a Xenos race, long thought extinct. A race obsessed with motion, with shifting stars, with the weaponization of speed itself. Helion whispers a quiet plea in binary prayer, not to the Emperor, not to the Omnissiah, but to the cold logic of survival. Because if she publishes her findings, she damns the Imperium for lying. If she hides them, she damns the planet. And as the mountains tremble like a dying titan, she knows she must choose. In the void above the world, battlecruisers shift into new formations as Lord Commissar Albrecht demands immediate orbital strikes on the awakening sites. But the Confessor steps forward, his voice trembling with both terror and conviction. "This is not Orc heresy," he says. "This is a test, a crucible. The Emperor himself may have buried these engines to guard humanity from its own sins." Albrecht almost laughs until he sees fear in the priest's eyes, not faith. The bridge crew watches as seismic readings spike. Entire mountain ranges begin to move. Not collapse, move. The world breathes like a titan easing its lungs after millennia of silence. Albrecht orders the first barrage, but the ship's machine spirit resists, systems flickering, targeting arrays refusing to lock. Then the howlith flashes. A message, impossible, unscheduled. The signature matches Governor Halix, but Halix has not transmitted anything in hours. The message is only 3 words: "Do not fire." Governor Halix stands in the ruins of his fortress as engines rupture the ground around him, illuminating the night with spirals of burning metal. His bodyguards are dead. His astropath is silent, eyes vacant sockets smoking with warp burn. His robes are torn, his mind frayed by revelations never meant for mortal thought. He stares at the glyphs rising from the earth, Xeno's symbols, pulsing with the tempo of ancient engines. Symbols identical to those hidden within sealed administrative archives he once glimpsed by accident. The Imperium did not colonize this world to expand its borders. It colonized this world to feed something buried, something asleep, something old. And now it awakens because the Orks, in their frenzied devotion to speed, have unknowingly completed the ritual humanity abandoned. Halix looks to the sky as his unintended transmission echoes through orbit. He whispers a truth no one must ever hear. This world was never ours. And as the mountains crack open, revealing the colossal silhouette of a machine older than human memory, shaped like a god of velocity forged in a forgotten age, every engine on the planet screams in unison. The Speed Freaks halt, not in fear, but in awe. The Imperial forces tremble. And the world, for the first time, begins to remember its true purpose. Something has awakened, and it is calling for a rider. Silence falls across the world as the ancient machine rises, its silhouette framed by molten stone and shuddering fault lines. For a moment, even the Speed Freaks stop their roaring engines, overwhelmed by a presence older than their savage instincts. The titanic construct breathes steam and radiation into the night air, each exhalation bending the wind itself. The guardsman who first witnessed its awakening crawls backward, blood freezing in his veins as he realizes it is not merely a weapon. It is a throne, a vessel carved for a rider who has not walked this galaxy for millennia. Above him, the sky churns with auroras of unnatural speed colors flickering too quickly for human eyes to comprehend. And in that shifting light, he feels the tiniest whisper thread into his mind. The race has begun. His faith falters under that whisper, not because it denies the Emperor, but because it feels like truth. In the orbiting battlecruiser, Lord Commissar Albrecht listens to conflicting Vox reports drowning his command deck. The machine spirit still refuses to lock orbit to surface bombardments. The Confessor collapses to his knees, gripping the rail as visions claw into his mind, visions of saints racing across impossible tracks, of angels shedding wings to claim engines of fire, of the Emperor himself striding through storms of velocity. Albrecht dismisses them as delirium, but a sliver of doubt pushes into his discipline-hardened soul. The Imperium taught him that faith is a weapon. Now it feels like a wound. He watches the planet's crust shifting like mechanical muscle as the construct awakens fully. The Confessor gasps a final prophecy. Speed is not their creed. It is their inheritance. Albrecht turns away, refusing to be shaken. But he wonders, are the Orks drawn to this relic because it sings to them, or because it sings to all who were never meant to hear? In the mountains, Magos Helion kneels before the rising Titan, her mechanical limbs trembling with forbidden understanding. She connects her data cables to the ancient circuitry jutting from the fractured ground. Data floods her mind in a torrent of symbols, equations, and star maps, all moving faster than her cognition can follow. She sees the truth. This machine is a fragment of a long-erased civilization, a species that worshipped motion as others worship flame. They harnessed speed not merely as momentum, but as metaphysics, belief, and physics intertwined until the boundary between soul and engine dissolved. The Orks did not awaken the machine by accident. Their frenetic culture echoes fragments of this ancient philosophy, war born of speed, devotion born of ignition. Helion disconnects, clutching her head as sparks burst from her cranial ports. If she reveals this truth, she condemns herself to execution for tech heresy. But if she conceals it, the Imperium remains blind to the threat racing toward them. Across the polar convent, Canoness Celine leads her sisters into formation atop the ice-ridged fortress. They chant hymns that once felt immovable, but now tremble with uncertainty. Beneath their boots, the ice fractures in symmetrical patterns, forming glowing lines that pulse toward the horizon, racing toward the awakening Titan. Celine watches them, feeling a sensation she has not known since her novitiate years: doubt. She has always believed the Emperor's light is constant, unbroken. But now, the auroras ripple in unnatural streams, bending around the sisters as if guided by another will. She feels the Emperor still distant, but unwavering, but it is as if another presence rises parallel to him, neither opposing nor serving, merely existing. A rival truth, ancient and patient. When the first tremor rocks the convent and the ice plains split open to reveal Ork vehicles tearing across newly forged paths, Celine raises her bolter not with certainty, but with defiant fear. In the wasteland below, Sergeant Mara and her remaining guardsmen witness the speedstorm gathering, a hurricane of dust and fire swirling around the colossal machine now fully emerged from the crust. Mara feels the rosary at her neck pulse with warmth, as though reacting to the storm's unnatural rhythm. She remembers her brother's final words before he fell to an Ork raid. Speed has its own kind of faith. She dismissed it as battlefield madness. Now she wonders. The storm intensifies, engines roaring within it like war spirits hunting through the gale. Her squad looks to her for orders, but what command can she give against a storm that worships itself? She whispers a prayer she barely believes in. Emperor, guide us. A gust tears her voice away as the first wave of Speed Freaks bursts from the maelstrom, not attacking, not marauding, circling the awakening Titan, as if honoring a ritual older than war. Deep within the mining tunnels, Overseer Dran leads survivors through collapsing caverns as the underground engines awaken in chain reaction. Walls glow with glyphs revealing themselves as the stone melts away, alien sigils depicting beings descending from the stars, not to conquer, but to race. Dran stumbles upon a chamber sealed since the planet's founding. Within lies a mural of a humanoid figure riding a streak of light, flanked by mechanical beasts of impossible velocity. A scripture carved beneath reads in an archaic form of Gothic: "When the rider returns, the engines shall follow." Dran falls to his knees. This was no colony, it was a vault, a waiting ground, and the Imperium knew. His loyalty cracks as he realizes every family who lived here was a pawn in a deception buried beneath bureaucracy. When the chamber trembles and dust rains from the ceiling, he knows the rider is awakening or being chosen. The planetary governor stumbles among the ruins of his palace as shadowed engines streak across the sky above him. He clutches the final forbidden documents he uncovered, records, sealed by the Inquisition, detailing an attempt to weaponize remnants of the ancient speed cult civilization. The Imperium failed. The Orks succeeded by accident. And now the machine has awakened to recognize the galaxy once more. Halix feels the air vibrate as the Titan emits a low, resonant hum. It's not a communication. It's a call, a summons. He realizes something horrifying. The machine does not seek a specific rider. It seeks the fastest, the most relentless, the one whose devotion to motion is boundless. And on this world, in this moment, that is not any Imperial hero. It is the Ork warboss streaking toward the Titan with a halo of fire blazing behind him. Helix whispers a prayer for the end to be swift. On the plain surrounding the awakening Titan, the warboss arrives, his bike blazing with unstable energy. The ground shakes under each rev, the machine responding as if greeting a long-lost kin. The freaks roar in exultation. But before the warboss can ascend the colossal ramp forming from the Titan structure, a shockwave bursts outward waveforms of psychic speed so intense that reality fractures. Visions slam into the minds of everyone on the planet. Images of ancient races racing across collapsing star systems, duels fought at light speed, gods forged from acceleration, galaxies reshaped not through conquest but velocity. The warboss falters, clutching his head, roaring in defiance. For the first time in his life, he slows. And in that hesitation, another vision appears, one of a figure, not orc, not human, but something radiant and swift, striding toward the Titan's heart. In orbit, Albrecht stares in horror as the Titan emits a pulse that knocks out every Imperial system across the fleet. Lights flicker, machine spirits wail, servitors scream in binary terror. The Confessor rises slowly, eyes glowing with reflected aurora light. "Do you understand now?" he whispers. "The Emperor's greatest enemy is not Xenos or heresy. It is a truth older than his throne." Albrecht grips his bolt pistol, unsure whether to aim at the Confessor or himself. Outside the viewport, the Titan lifts its head, scanning the heavens. The engines of every Ork vehicle on the planet ignite at once, unified by unseen command. And in the depths of the ship, the astropaths wail. The signal is not planetary. It is galactic. As the Titan's core ignites and a beam of impossible speed tears open the sky, the final revelation strikes every soul present. The machine is not a weapon. It is a beacon. And someone has begun racing toward it from beyond the stars. The storm began with a silence so absolute it felt like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The air aboard the strike cruiser tasted of machine oil and incense, thick with the residue of prayers whispered too late. Brother Sergeant Cale stood before the viewport, watching the warp bleed its sickly colors across the hull, knowing the omens were wrong but the orders were absolute. Behind him, the chaplain's litany echoed like a funeral bell, each syllable a reminder that duty demanded they walk into the jaws of something far older than rebellion. When the klaxons finally wailed, it was almost a relief, an end to waiting, a beginning to dying. The boarding torpedoes locked into place with a shudder that felt like the ship itself recoiling, but none spoke, none faltered. In that moment, every vow they'd ever sworn pressed down on them like the weight of a tomb, and still they marched. The drop through void space felt endless, a descent through crushing inevitability rather than distance. The moment the torpedo slammed into the heretic ship's hull, the world snapped into red-lit violence. The breach opened like a metallic wound, spewing sparks and smoke that curled into shapes too close to screaming faces. Cale led the charge, his bolter roaring a hymn of absolution. But the rebels did not scatter. They surged forward with a fanatic's hunger, their eyes wild with the faith of the damned. Every shot that tore through flesh echoed with questions he refused to acknowledge. A frag detonated somewhere to his right, showering him with bone shards, and still he pressed on, his breath harsh inside his helm, tasting burned copper. Duty demanded progress. Duty had always demanded the impossible. And yet with each enemy they felled, the ship groaned like a beast waking, as though the corruption ran deeper than any mortal rebellion. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the vessel, the lights flickered out, plunging the corridor into a strobing half-life where shadows moved slower than bodies. The squad advanced in a formation more out of instinct than strategy now, the air humming with static and whispered blasphemies from the Vox. Cale felt the hair rise on his arms even through ceramite. The warp taint here was not rumor, but presence. They found a shrine assembled from stolen Imperial relics, defaced and fused with organic matter still warm to the touch. Brother Iester reached toward it with the caution of a man touching the memory of a wound, then recoiled as the icon pulsed like a heartbeat. Before they could retreat, The walls themselves began to sweat, oily tears dripping down as if the metal mourned. Kale realized then that their enemy had surrendered not only their faith but their souls, and the ship hungered for replacements. Thunderhammer blows finally shattered the shrine, but the air didn't clear. It thickened. When they reached the central conduit, the faint trembling underfoot became a violent shudder that nearly threw them off balance. The heretic ship was altering course, accelerating toward the Imperial fleet with suicidal intent. Kale opened a vox line, but all he caught were fractured pleas from other boarding parties, their words dissolving into static layered with distant shrieks. Brother Lauren pointed ahead where a cluster of rebels had barricaded themselves behind overturned bulkhead plates, fighting like cornered animals. Kale ordered a push, his voice hardened by urgency. This ship could not be allowed to ram the fleet. The firefight erupted instantly, muzzle flashes painting the walls in feverish strobes. A rebel lunged at Kale with a chain blade, the teeth screeching across his pauldron before his power sword silenced the threat in a burst of ozone. Yet even as the last defender fell, Kale sensed victory slipping from their grasp. The ship was still accelerating. Something else was controlling it. They forced open the doors to the command spire, only to find it half transformed into a throne of mechanized flesh. Servo wires pulsed like veins, and the command crew were fused into their stations, their faces stretched in rictus prayers to powers no loyal tongue dared name. At the center sat the shipmaster, or what remained of him, his body grown into the controls, ribs cracked open like a birdcage, exposing organs pumping to a rhythm not his own. His voice gurgled through multiple throats, chanting a liturgy that turned the air sour. Kale ordered the squad to purge the room, but even bolter fire seemed reluctant to kill what no longer resembled life. As they advanced, the shipmaster fixed his hollow stare on Kale, whispering something that sounded like prophecy. Kale didn't let him finish. His blade severed the last of the creature's consciousness, but the ship did not slow. The lights dimmed further. Something deeper had taken command. The squad descended into the reactor galleries where the sound of clashing metal and tortured screams merged into a single suffocating roar. The air shimmered with heat and warp static, the reactor pulsing like a wounded star ready to tear itself apart. Rebels circled it in a maddened ritual, carving symbols into their own flesh as if their pain powered the machine. Kale hesitated only a heartbeat long enough to feel the moral fracture within him widen before ordering the purge. They tore through the cultists with merciless precision, but every wound spilled phosphorescent blood that crawled along the deck like living mercury. A shard of corrupted scripture nailed above the reactor broke loose and fluttered in the heat like a burning butterfly before turning to ash. When the final heretic fell, Kale approached the core. He felt its vibration through the solace of his boots, a cold, alien pulse. It was no longer a reactor. It was an altar. Beyond the gallery stretched a maintenance causeway, so narrow their armored shoulders scraped the walls. The smell changed here: less blood, more cold iron, and something like old sorrow. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, the reverb carrying too far, returning distorted. Brother Lauren muttered a prayer under his breath, but each repetition sounded like someone else was speaking with him, slightly out of sync. The corridor curved until it emptied into a chamber lit only by a single lumen globe swinging from a frayed cable. In the center knelt a lone figure in a tattered Imperial uniform, head bowed, hands clasped in supplication. Kale approached cautiously, recognizing the insignia. This man had once been an Imperial officer. When he finally lifted his face, Kale saw madness carved into every line. "You're too late," he whispered, the words breaking like dry leaves. "It's already chosen." Before Kale could question him, the man opened his throat with a shard of metal and collapsed smiling. They pressed deeper, each step bending the line between reality and nightmare. The ship groaned as though straining against invisible shackles. At one junction, the walls bulged outward with trapped faces, some human, some not, eyes rolling beneath translucent membranes. The squad halted, instincts warning them this was more than corruption. It was metamorphosis. Bolter rounds put an end to their suffering, but the faces dissolved into sludge rather than corpse. Kale felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but a dawning comprehension that this mission was no longer about victory. It was containment. Or burial. A sudden tremor threw them off balance as a metallic roar echoed through the decks, the unmistakable sound of something vast tearing free. Kale issued the order to advance faster, ignoring the small voice inside him, whispering that each step was carrying them into a fate no battle doctrine had prepared them for. The final approach to the heart of the vessel felt like walking through a dying world. Power conduits sparked overhead like lightning in a storm, casting jagged shadows that moved with predatory intent. Static-filled chanting rumbled through the bulkheads, a choir of broken throats praising a presence not yet fully born. The temperature plunged, frost crawling up the edges of their armor, then spiked so violently it felt like standing in a furnace. Reality was fraying. They found the path to the core, torn open as if by monstrous claws. Kale felt an ache behind his eyes, the psychic pressure mounting with every heartbeat. Brother Iester faltered, gripping his helm, muttering that something was speaking through the metal. Kale seized his shoulder and pushed him forward, voice a blade of command. They had come too far to retreat. Too much blood had been spilled to allow hesitation. Ahead, the core chamber pulsed with an impossible light. They entered the final chamber, and everything stopped. Sound, breath, even thoughts seemed to freeze under the weight of the presence waiting within. The core had been reshaped into a vast cocoon of metal and flesh, suspended by tendrils humming with warp energy. At its center, something stirred. Not fully formed, not yet awake, but aware. The air vibrated with a low, hungry anticipation that clawed down Kale's spine. He felt the squad tighten around him, not out of courage but because to step back meant admitting fear that would shatter them. The cocoon split just slightly, a thin line of crimson light spilling out like the first crack of dawn on a cursed world. Kale raised his weapon, knowing it would not be enough, knowing none of them were enough. The tendrils flexed, the chamber shook, and the ship itself seemed to draw a breath. Time held still, trembling on the cusp of catastrophe, as the thing inside began to wake. The cocoon split with a shriek that wasn't sound but pressure, a psychic howl that rattled ceramite and cracked resolve. Kale staggered as raw warp light poured from the opening, illuminating the squad in ghostly silhouettes. Something inside was unfolding, limbs not yet solid, wings that flickered between flesh and nightmare. The air boiled. Brother Iester dropped to one knee, clutching his helm as if holding in his own mind. Kale moved without thinking. Duty before terror. Faith before comprehension. He charged, power sword raised high, the blade trailing arcs of blue lightning. Each step felt like wading through a dying star. The creature's eyes opened, two suns of bleeding red, and the world lurched. Kale's strike landed, carving a line of burning matter, but it was like cutting fog that screamed. The chamber erupted into chaos. Gunfire, roars, shattered prayers. And above it all, the abomination slowly uncoiling into existence. Brother Lauren was the first to fall. One of the creature's tendrils snapped forward with blinding speed, spearing through his chestplate and lifting him like a broken doll. His scream turned to a wet gargle as the tendril twisted, fracturing armor, bone, everything. Kale fired point blank, each bolter shell slamming into the creature's hide in explosions of fire, but they vanished into the warp light as though consumed. The monstrosity answered with a roar that shook the ship's frame. Bulkheads split, pipes burst overhead, showering scalding steam. The chaplain lunged into the fray, Crozius blazing with righteous fury as he bellowed the litany of enduring valor. For a moment, just a moment, his voice pushed back the psychic storm. The creature recoiled with a noise like tearing worlds, but victory was an illusion. A spike of pure warp energy erupted from its torso, impaling the chaplain mid-chant, his voice cut off. His body fell, armor cooling like a dying sun. The creature's emergence accelerated, its form stabilizing into a towering horror of fused bone wings and molten veins. Each step it took warped the metal beneath it, leaving smoking craters. Kale realized with grim clarity that this was no summoned demon, it was being born. The ship was its cradle. Every death they inflicted had nourished it. A seismic shock slammed them all to the floor as the ship veered off course, its engines screaming under impossible strain. Through the hull, Kale felt the psychic echo of Imperial ships responding with weapons hot, preparing to obliterate the heretic vessel if he failed. He rose, dragging Aister to his feet. The squad had dwindled to 4. They formed a line out of instinct, brothers bound by something deeper than flesh. The creature stared down at them, head tilting in a mockery of curiosity. Kale felt its voice in his skull. Chosen, witness, break. He spat blood and charged. The battle became a blur of violence, too fast and too slow at once. Kale's sword carved arcs of lightning that clashed with claws dripping shadow. Sparks flew like burning snow. Aister's plasma fire blasted chunks of the creature's shifting flesh, only for the wounds to heal in writhing knots. Brother Rem took a hit that snapped his helm clean off, his skull crushed in an instant. His body slumped soundlessly as if reluctant to disturb the fight. Kale caught an opening and drove his blade deep into the creature's abdomen. This time it screamed. The chamber buckled. A psychic shockwave threw them back. Kale smashed into a pillar, ribs cracking. His visor flickered, blurry shapes swimming across his vision. He forced himself upright, tasting iron. The creature staggered, leaking ichor that burned through the floor. It was weakening, but so were they. He could feel time stretching thin, victory dangling like a threat above a void. Kale knew they couldn't kill it, not completely, but they could stop its birth. The reactor, it was the womb. He voxed the survivors, though only static answered until Aister's trembling voice cut through, strained but alive. They would overload the core, die here if needed. Prevent the creature from reaching the fleet. Kale gave the order. The weight of it settled in his bones like a final benediction. They sprinted toward the reactor conduits as the creature roared and lunged after them, its wings scraping the ceiling in a storm of sparks. A blast door slammed shut behind Kale as Brother Tarn stayed back to delay the monster, firing into its face until his ammo ran dry. Kale heard his death through the Vox: a crunch, a scream, then silence. He didn't slow. The reactor chamber loomed ahead, pulsing violently, its tendrils vascular with warp energy. Kale's HUD flickered warnings. He ignored them. Inside the reactor chamber, alarms blared like a chorus of dying saints. The air shimmered with heat and psychic distortion, the core thrumming with unstable life. Aister stumbled toward the control node, his armor scorched, his breaths ragged. Kale covered him, firing at the creature bursting through the entry with fury beyond reason. The overload sequence required manual confirmation, a kill switch that guaranteed death. Aister reached for it, then faltered. His hand trembled. Kale saw the fear in his eyes, a fear not of death, but of failing the Emperor. Without a word, Kale placed his gauntlet over Aister's, steadying it. Together, they activated the sequence. Radiation poured from the core in shimmering waves. The creature shrieked, thrashing forward, wings flaring with incandescent rage. Kale turned to face it, sword humming. Aister collapsed behind him, body failing. Kale whispered a final prayer, for duty, for brothers, for humanity. Then he charged into the monster's shadow. The clash was apocalyptic. Warp light collided with the purity of the power field, each strike shaking the chamber. Kale's armor split. Blood filled his visor, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every memory of every fallen brother screamed within him. A tendril skewered his abdomen, lifting him from the floor. Pain blotted out vision. The creature pulled him close, its face inches from his. He saw galaxies dying in its eyes. saw futures ending, saw himself unmade. With the last strength he had, Cale drove his sword up through its jaw, forcing the blade into the creature's skull. This time the scream was real. The creature convulsed, dropping him. The core behind them surged with blinding light, climbing toward critical mass. Cale fell to his knees, lungs failing, but he felt something strange peace. He had done his duty. The Emperor would decide the rest. The chamber dissolved into white. The blast never sounded. There was only pressure, then absence, time fractured. A sensation like drifting through ash-filled water. Cale blinked through the haze, though he had no body now, or perhaps he did, and it simply didn't matter. He saw the ship peeling apart, layers unfurling like petals of a dying flower. He saw the creature split in two, its form dissolving into screaming light. He saw Aister's still body illuminated one final time before vanishing. Then silence, a silence deeper than void, a silence with weight. Slowly, pieces of reality knitted back together. Cale felt gravity return, heard distant vox chatter, smelled smoke. He opened his eyes to see the broken remains of the ship drifting apart like burnt parchment. Imperial cruisers surrounded it at a distance, weapons cooling. Somehow impossibly he was alive, floating in the wreckage, armor cracked but intact. The core hadn't fully detonated. It had transformed. Rescue craft approached. Lights swept across the debris. Cale felt hands pulling him onto a platform, Medicae voices shouting, but they sounded far away, distorted by something lingering in the air, a shift, a wound. Something eternal had bent and not yet snapped back. He felt it beneath his skin, the echo of the creature's dying scream etched into his bones. The apothecary spoke to him, but his attention drifted to the void where the ship had been. A faint shimmer pulsed there, like a heartbeat between dimensions. The creature had died, yes, but its birth had not truly ended. Cale could still feel the psychic residue, a stain on the fabric of reality, a promise whispered across the stars. As the shuttle door closed and the world dimmed to darkness, he understood the truth. The storm was not over. It had only moved elsewhere. And the galaxy had shifted, forever changed, waiting for what would come next. In the soft hum of the Medicae bay, Cale felt the void still clinging to him like a second skin. The lumin strips flickered with a hesitant glow, as though unsure whether to illuminate a survivor or a ghost. His breathing was shallow, each inhale scraping along cracked ribs, each exhale carrying the weight of everything that had been lost. Apothecaries whispered nearby, documenting wounds that should have killed him 10 times over. Yet he lived, tethered by a thread of fate stretched thin across the gulf of stars. He stared past them, past the walls, past the corridor outside, toward the memory of that lingering shimmer in the void, the place where something had died, yet not ended. It haunted him quietly, like a whisper slipping beneath consciousness. And in that silence, Cale realized survival was not victory. Survival was simply the beginning of a different kind of burden. When he was finally deemed stable enough to walk, he moved like a man returning from his own grave. The ship's chapel called to him, not with faith, but with the weight of ritual, of habit carved into bone. He stepped inside. Candles burned low, their flames wavering like dying souls trying to stay tethered a moment longer. Incense drifted in lazy coils, clinging to the vaulted ceiling where murals of saints and martyrs stared down with hollow eyes. Cale removed his cracked helmet and placed it before the altar. The chaplain who had once stood fiery and unbroken was gone now, reduced to ash and memory. Cale bowed his head. He expected to pray. Instead, only silence came. Not the comforting silence of reverence. This was the silence of truths unspoken, of questions without answers, of faith shaken, but not yet fallen. He closed his eyes and waited for a voice that did not come. In the days that followed, rumors whispered across the fleet like drifting smoke. Some claimed the warp anomaly they detected before the ship's destruction had recoiled, wounded. Others insisted it had expanded, creating a tear too faint for scanners, but too alive for psychers to ignore. Kale overheard these conversations without ever stopping to join them. He felt something inside him shift, an echo of the creature's dying presence lodged between thought and heartbeat. It wasn't corruption, he would have known that terror, but it was change, a resonance, a mark left by something that had glimpsed him across the veil. He walked the ship's corridors during those long hours, passing crew who saluted him with awe or fear, he could not tell. To them he was a survivor of an impossible event. To Kale he was something more troubling, a witness to a birth that had almost unmade reality. High Command summoned him at last, their chamber cold and carved from iron and shadow. Holodisplays flickered with data feed fragments, psychic readings, residual warp signatures, tactical projections of threats that didn't yet have names. The Inquisitor presiding over the briefing studied Kale with eyes like sharpened obsidian. He asked questions, each one probing deeper, not for facts but for fractures, for the fault lines where a man breaks. Kale answered honestly. He described the creature, the voices, the way the warp had seemed to breathe through the metal of the ship. But he did not describe the lingering echo. That was not omission. That was instinct, a quiet part of him whispering that some truths could not be spoken without reshaping the listener. When the briefing ended, the Inquisitor dismissed him with a nod that did not trust nor condemn. It simply judged and left the sentence hanging for later. The fleet moved on new orders, new wars, the great wheel of the Imperium grinding forward as it always had and always would. Yet Kale felt the galaxy differently now. Every star seemed dimmer, as though veiled in mourning. Every corridor carried the ghost of footsteps that would never return. He visited the memorial wall, where his brothers' names had been etched into ceramite slabs still warm from the engraving. His gaunted fingers traced each one: Loran, Iester, the chaplain. He whispered their oaths to himself. Not to remember, memory was pain, but to anchor himself. To remind his soul that what had happened was real, that they had lived, that their deaths had shaped the moment the galaxy briefly held its breath. He wondered if their sacrifice had truly changed anything, or if it had merely delayed a storm that would someday break across 1,000 worlds. In the solitude of his quarters, Kale removed the fragmented plates of his armor and stared at the scars webbed across his skin, new ones, layered atop old ones, each telling its own story of a war that had no end. His reflection in the steel surface of a maintenance panel looked like a stranger carved from duty and exhaustion. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw the shimmer again. Faint, pulsing, patient, he did not fear it. Fear would have been a mercy. Instead, he felt a gravity to it, a pull that suggested unfinished threads woven into the fabric of fate. He wondered if the creature had truly died, or if a piece of it had passed into him, not corruption, but awareness. A shard of understanding no mortal should possess. He shook the thought away, though it clung stubbornly, like dust in a dying star's light. Meditation offered no refuge, but he sought it anyway. In the silence of the observation deck, stars stretched in vast rivers of fire, their cold brilliance piercing the void. Kale sat there, helmet beside him, the galaxy reflected in the fractured lens. He watched the starlight ripple across the glass where the ship's shields shimmered faintly. He thought of the Emperor not as a deity, but as a man who had once carried the burden of every soul beneath humanity's banner. Did he foresee horrors like this creature? Did he predict the ways the warp would birth new abominations from old wounds? Or was the Emperor, even in his godlike power, once capable of doubt? Kale found no answers. Only the quiet hum of the ship and the ancient truth that humanity survived not through certainty, but through the stubborn will to continue walking into darkness. The final transmission arrived weeks later, delivered in a sealed data slate bearing the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. Kale opened it with a sense of inevitability. The message was brief, a report confirming the anomaly's persistence. It had shifted location subtle, almost imperceptible, but measurable to those who knew where to look. A ripple in the warp, A deviation. A wound reopening. The ship's destruction had not ended the threat. It had merely altered it. At the end of the document was a single note, handwritten in the stoic script of the Inquisitor. If you feel anything unusual, report immediately. Cale closed the slate. He felt everything unusual. But he also felt something else. Responsibility. Not to the Inquisition, not even to the Imperium, but to the memory of those who had died believing the galaxy could still be protected from monsters born of nightmares. On the eve of deployment to their next warfront, Cale stood once more in the ship's chapel. The candles burned brighter now, as though refusing to surrender their light. The murals seemed less hollow, more watchful, as though the saints understood the burden he carried. He knelt, not in prayer, but in reflection. The creature's echo stirred faintly in the edges of his mind, not malevolent, but inevitable like thunder before a distant storm. Cale breathed slowly, deeply, feeling the weight and the clarity of the moment settle into him. He knew what lay ahead: battle without end, choices without comfort, and a future shaped by secrets too dangerous to name. Maybe humanity would endure. Maybe it wouldn't. But the question lingered like incense in the air. What does it truly cost to survive, when survival means carrying the shadows of what should never have existed? As he rose, donning his helmet once more, the chapel lights dimmed, the ship's engines roared awake, and the calm before the next storm wrapped itself around him like a final benediction. The galaxy waited in silence, ancient and wounded. Cale stepped forward, not as a hero, not as a survivor, but as a witness to truths that would shape wars yet unimagined. And as the ship slipped into the void, he felt one last thought settle in his mind, haunting, solemn, eternal. If faith is what binds humanity together, what becomes of a man who has seen what lies beneath faith's fragile surface? If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments.